The house still smelled like collard greens and roasted chicken. I'd been in that kitchen since dawn, humming Precious Lord under my breath, folding napkins into doves just like my mama taught me. That old gospel tune used to calm me when I had nothing but hope in the cupboard and a baby on my hip. Tonight was supposed to be about family, about giving thanks early, while we could still all be in one room without arguing over who forgot whose birthday. I raised Cade on faith, grit, and sweet tea. After his daddy passed, it was just me and him. I carried that boy on my back through double shifts and long nights. I prayed over every scraped knee and bad report card. And now, here we were. Him a grown man with polished shoes and a car that beeped when you got too close, and me still folding napkins with the same hands that once held his feverish little head. Cade walked in like he had somewhere better to be. Gave me a quick peck on the cheek, eyes already scanning the room like he was checking inventory, not visiting home. He smiled at his wife, shared a joke with his cousin, but with me, there was something missing. I didn't say a word, just whispered to myself, "Don't start no storm tonight." Dinner was ready, table set just so, candles lit, plates lined up, name cards made by hand like I always did. I liked the tradition, the little touches. Everybody had their name at the table. Everybody but me. I paused, blinked twice, looked again. No card for Lucina. Did I forget to make one for myself? I asked, half laughing to ease the tension building in my chest. Cade didn't even look up. "Mom, it's just dinner, not a ceremony." They chuckled. That soft, polite kind of laugh folks do when they don't want to seem rude, but ain't gonna stop you from feeling alone either. I pulled out a blank card from the side drawer, wrote my name on it real slow. "Respect starts at home," I whispered under my breath. Words my mother used to say when folks got too comfortable forgetting their elders. I poured sweet tea like everything was fine. Smiled, sat, bit my tongue till it tasted like metal. Later that night, when they were watching football and joking in the living room, I went to the kitchen to order groceries for the church dinner next week. Clicked through my usual list, but when I went to pay, transaction declined. Thought maybe I entered something wrong. Tried again. Declined. I pulled out my phone, called the number on the back of the card. Sat on hold, listening to some smooth jazz that made my headache worse. Then a voice finally came through. "Ma'am, the card was canceled earlier this week by the account holder." "What do you mean canceled?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Closed. At the request of Mr. Cade Haynes." Cade stepped into the kitchen like he'd been listening the whole time. "I did it," he said flat. "You gotta learn to live without my money, Mama." Just like that. Not even a pause. The room fell dead quiet. I swear even the walls held their breath. I stared at him, my hand still gripping the phone like it had answers. My lip twitched, but I held it. I always held it. "I've been living long before your money, son." He smirked, that crooked little smirk like he'd won something. Then he turned and went right back to the couch like we hadn't just carved a new scar between us. I sat down on the stool, stared at the counter, the pots, the empty card in my name. Didn't cry. Not then. I thought back. To every shift I worked with aching feet. To every night I counted pennies to make sure Cade had what he needed for school. To the time I skipped lunch for a week so he could go on a field trip. And now, this. My husband once told me, money changes a man faster than love ever could. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I rinsed the dishes, one by one. Let the water run over my hands like it could wash the years away. I saw myself in the window above the sink, older, wiser, maybe a little cracked at the edges, but still whole. I said to my reflection, quiet but clear, "Not this time." No begging, no shouting. I wasn't raised like that. My mama taught me to move in silence, and that's what I plan to do. As I turned off the kitchen light, Cade's laughter echoed down the hall. It didn't sting the way I thought it would. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that came from joy. I didn't sleep much the night before. I laid there listening to the creaks in the floorboards and the occasional gust tapping against the windows, like even the wind was unsettled. The house felt colder than usual, though I hadn't touched the thermostat. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the way Cade's words kept circling in my mind like a record I couldn't scratch. The morning light came slow, soft, like it didn't want to disturb what was already broken. I sat up, moved quiet through the room, got dressed for church like I always did. My Sunday hat, the navy one with the small pearl brooch, sat waiting on the dresser. Same one I wore the day Cade crossed that graduation stage and looked back at me like I was the finish line. I pinned it on and stared at myself. No call, no text. Just that weak, see you later. He tossed out last night like I was one of his co-workers. I almost stayed home. Lord knows I thought about it. But then I remembered, God didn't ghost me. So I walked out the door with my Bible in one hand and pride in the other, humming softly, forcing a smile in place before I even hit the church steps. Miss Thelma was the first one I saw. "You too classy to let hurt show," she whispered when we hugged, and I held on to that like a shield. The service was warm, familiar. Reverend Jacobs preached about legacy, how the seeds we plant in others are the fruit they bear long after we're gone. I swallowed that sermon like medicine, bitter but needed. Afterwards, the church hosted a little appreciation for caregivers, folks who give back to the community without expecting thanks. I stood toward the back, clapping along, glad to be part of something steady. Then I saw Cade step up. He took the mic with a proud smile, called Tasha forward. My daughter-in-law walked up looking surprised, a soft grin playing on her lips. "This woman," Cade said, "is the rock of our family. She holds us together with grace and wisdom. And I'm proud to call her my wife." A wrapped box was handed to her. Gold paper, silver bow, cameras flashed. No mention of me. I clapped. I did. But my palms stung from the pressure. My face stretched into something that looked like joy. But inside, it was empty. "Ms." Thelma leaned close again and said, "Funny how the rock got built on someone else's back." I nodded slightly. Didn't say a word. What could I say? The whole church watched as if this was a fairy tale unfolding, not a page torn from the truth. Back home, I changed out of my dress slower than usual, hung it up with care, like it mattered. On the kitchen table sat a smaller version of the same gold gift bag. Cade had left it behind, probably thought he was doing me a kindness. Inside was a candle and a pre-printed thank you note. I sat down, stared at the flicker of the flame. Did I raise him to forget the roots? I thought of him at 10 years old, running into my arms after school with a homemade card in crayon, stick figures, and "You're the reason I smile" scrawled across the top. Back then, his world was small and safe, and I was the center of it. Now, I was an afterthought. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over his name. Then I pressed delete. No message, no voice left behind. I opened my old notebook instead, the one I kept tucked between bills and recipe cards. Wrote down 5 words. I know the truth still. Maya Angelou's quote drifted through my mind like a prayer. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The truth had been showing for a while now. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. By evening, I had brewed some tea, sat at the dining table, and pulled out the old financial binder, the one Cade used to lean on me to manage, pages filled with receipts and records. Tuition bills I paid, the down payment on his first car, the baby shower I threw for Tasha when nobody else offered. I made copies of every page, filed them neatly into a fresh folder. "If I'm invisible," I murmured, "let's see how far their story goes without the facts." There was no fire in my tone, just focus. Steady hands, quiet strength. I slipped the folder into my desk drawer and wrote the word legacy across the top in bold ink. You only erase the woman who made you when you're ready to face the woman she's become. Just as I closed the drawer, my phone vibrated. Cade. His name lit up the screen. I didn't move, let it ring. Instead, I sat still in that silence, knowing the next time I speak, it won't be to ask. It'll be to tell. By mid-morning, I'd already been out twice, first to the pharmacy, then to the post office. I told myself errands helped clear the mind, but truth was, I was just trying not to think too much. I slipped into my maroon coat, the one I always said was my armor, and stepped out into the cool Atlanta air. It hugged my shoulders like a reminder that even when the world feels off, you still have to move. At the grocery store, folks greeted me like always. Cashier asked about my grandbabies. The man at the door held it open with a smile. People can be kind without knowing what's cracking behind your ribs. They see an older woman, alone but steady, and assume peace must come easy. But peace don't come easy in a house that don't respect you. I pushed my cart slow, filling it with things I didn't really need. Grapes, candles, a bag of flour I still had plenty of at home. Anything to fill the silence. When I got back to the car, I sat there before turning the key. My phone buzzed with a notification. Black Love Matters, featuring Tasha Raynell on building generational wealth. I stared at it for a minute, thumb hovering. Then I tapped play. At first, it sounded like any other show. Soft music, polished voices. Tasha's tone was smooth, confident. We built something out of faith and hustle, she said. Nobody handed us anything. I froze. Then I heard Cade's voice, chiming in halfway through like a guest cameo. I owe everything to the women who raised me right. My Aunt Shirley, my teachers, my mentors. My name didn't come. Not once. Tasha kept talking about their journey, about sacrifice and partnership. We learned early you gotta break cycles, she said. Sometimes even family don't understand the vision. My hand tightened around the phone. Family, I whispered. That's what I called it when I worked 2 jobs to keep your lights on. I turned up the volume. Couldn't help it. Needed to be sure I heard right. Cade laughed on cue, his voice proud. Yeah, we did it all from scratch. Just us two. I closed my eyes. Saw him as a boy again, sitting on the floor of my old office, coloring in a book while I balanced the ledgers from my shift. I'd whisper to him then, "You're gonna be something one day." And he'd say, "Because of you, Mama." Now, it was like that woman never existed. The air inside the car got heavy. My throat burned, but no tears came, just that hollow kind of ache that settles deep, where no sound can reach it. I turned off the podcast, sat still for a long time. Then I drove home slow, letting the city blur past the window. The world outside was loud, alive, unaware that someone's story was being rewritten in real time. I parked in front of the house but didn't get out, pulled the visor down, and caught my reflection in the mirror. So this is what being forgotten looks like, I said to the tired face staring back. A laugh slipped out, soft, shaky. It turned to a tear before I could stop it, not from weakness, but from understanding. You don't cry over loss, you cry over recognition. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed, "They rewrite you when they fear what your truth would do to their pretty picture." The words looked sharp on the screen, like truth always does. Toni Morrison once said, "If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem." I whispered that quote out loud. Felt it settle in me. No more kneeling. By the time the sun began to dip, I was inside again, surrounded by papers and silence. I printed out the transcript of the podcast, each page a lie dressed up as legacy. I read every word twice, then picked up a highlighter and started marking what wasn't true. Whole paragraphs turned yellow. Then I went to the hallway closet, pulled out the old photo albums. Cade's graduation picture was right there. Him in that cap and gown, me standing beside him, hand on his back, smiling like tomorrow was guaranteed. I took the photo out carefully, slid it into an envelope, wrote one word across the front. Perspective. After that, I called Henrietta. She used to counsel kids at the school, wise as a preacher and twice as patient. When she answered, I said, "You ever teach somebody how to tell their story, the way it really happened?" She paused, then said, "Baby, that's the only kind worth telling." I looked down at the folder on the table, the one I'd labeled Legacy. My hands were steady now. My voice, too. "If they want a story without me," I whispered, "they better be ready for the chapter I'm about to write." The world may have forgotten my name, but I just remembered who I am. The invitation came mid-afternoon, tucked between the bills on my counter. "Dinner before the gala. Just a little thank you, Mom." The handwriting was Tasha's, too neat, too careful. Cade's name was printed underneath, like an afterthought. I stood there for a minute, letter in hand, feeling that old ache return, the one that came every time they pretended things were fine. Still, I went. I always go, don't I? Not for them, but for myself. Showing up is a kind of strength too. I dressed slowly, every movement deliberate. My cream blouse, navy skirt, the pearl earrings Mama gave me when I turned 21. "When you wear these," she'd said, "remember you come from something steady." I pinned them on and took one last look in the mirror. Calm. Composed. Ready for whatever game this dinner might be. The restaurant was all glass and gold. You could see your reflection in the floor. The hostess smiled like she'd been trained to. "Welcome, Mrs. Haynes." They're already seated. She led me through rows of white tablecloths and soft jazz. I saw them before they saw me. Cade at the head of the table, Tasha glowing beside him, a circle of board members laughing like they shared a secret. The seats were arranged neatly, intentional. My place card was at the far end. The end. I smiled anyway. "Mama, you made it," Cade said, half standing. He didn't walk around, didn't offer a hand. "I said I would," I replied, sliding into my seat. The table was full of familiar faces, people from the foundation I helped fund years ago. My money had built that foundation brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I heard one man whisper, "Tasha's journey is so inspiring, a self-made woman truly." The woman beside him nodded. "She's building legacy from scratch." I stirred my water, let the comment sit where it landed. Legacy from scratch. Funny how folks forget where the first scratch came from. Then the waiter dimmed the lights. A screen came to life behind Cade and Tasha. The title glowed in gold, honoring Tasha Raynell, the self-made woman. The slideshow began. Pictures of her smiling at fundraisers, shaking hands, standing in front of schools I helped pay for. Then, just for a heartbeat, there I was. In a photo beside her, years ago at a church event. The caption read, "A friend of a donor." I blinked. And then it was gone. The next slide showed a donation amount, 6 figures, the same sum I'd given from my retirement account when the foundation first started. But the credit read, "Anonymous Founding Angel." My throat went dry. Cade stood to speak. His voice was warm, proud. "We learned early that no one was going to give us anything, so we gave it to ourselves." The audience clapped. I sat still. Not one mention, not one truth. In that moment, I remembered writing that check. Sitting at my kitchen table with trembling hands, praying it wouldn't bounce. Telling myself it was an investment in something bigger than me, and now that something had swallowed me whole. Dinner carried on with laughter and wine. I excused myself quietly, heading toward the restroom. I needed a moment alone, but footsteps followed. Tasha. "Leaving already?" she asked, adjusting her lipstick in the mirror. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Just catching my breath." She smiled at our reflections. "You looked surprised during the presentation." I met her eyes. "You could have honored me, Tasha. All you had to do was not erase me." Her tone didn't change. "Sometimes too much truth muddies the brand." "The brand," I repeated softly. "And sometimes hiding the truth costs more than telling it ever would." We stood there in silence. Her perfume was heavy, sweet and sharp. I looked at her through the mirror, calm as still water. One of us saw a reflection, the other saw through it. I walked out before she could answer. Outside, the night was crisp. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I crossed the parking lot. I didn't wait for Cade or a ride. The valet offered to fetch my car, and I nodded, keeping my eyes on the horizon. Sometimes the only way to hold your dignity is to leave before someone tries to take it. When I got home, I dropped my purse on the table. Inside, the envelope with Cade's graduation photos was still there. Him, smiling beside me, back when gratitude was natural, not rehearsed. I didn't take them out, not yet. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, typed one email. To Marla Jenkins, WQAL Community Voices Radio. Subject: Truth deserves airtime too. That was it. No attachment. No explanation. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark window, pearl earrings catching the lamplight. "Let them call me dramatic," I whispered. "I'd rather be dramatic than disappeared." Some stories don't need rewriting. They just need to be told loud enough. The text came late Saturday evening. Sunday dinner? For the kids, it read. No heart, no warmth, just that. Tasha sent it, of course. She even added, "Hope you'll bring your peach cobbler. The boy's been missing it." I smiled to myself. The same cobbler she once said was too old-fashioned for modern taste. Funny how history rewrites itself when it's convenient. Sunday rolled around quiet and gray. I baked the cobbler anyway. The smell of peaches and brown sugar filled my kitchen, stirring up memories of simpler days, birthdays, laughter, my boys stealing bites before the crust cooled. I packed it carefully, slid on my cardigan, and drove over. Their neighborhood always looked too perfect. Trimmed hedges, wide smiles, nothing real showing. I rang the bell once, twice. No answer. So I let myself in. The house smelled like candles and chicken, sweet, polished, hollow. I heard voices in the kitchen. Tasha's tone was low but sharp. "Let's keep it light tonight, okay?" No drama. Cade murmured something back. "I just want peace." I stood there for a beat, cobbler in my hands, then whispered to myself, if being honest is drama, they best prepare for a whole show. When I walked into the dining room, Tasha turned like she'd just remembered inviting me. "Oh, hey, you made it early." "Better early than not wanted," I said, setting the cobbler on the counter. She blinked, but didn't reply. Dinner began like a stage play. Cade talked about work, contracts, deadlines, success stories that didn't need witnesses. Tasha talked about her podcast metrics, her followers, her influence. They smiled at each other like the rest of us were props. The kids were polite, too polite, asking only what they'd been told to ask. "Grandma, how's church?" I told them fine. They nodded and went back to their plates. No follow-up, no spark, just the echo of manners without meaning. I kept my fork moving, my voice quiet. I'd learned long ago that silence can be both shield and sword, but then Cade looked up, his tone carefully casual. "Mom, I heard you were upset about the gala. I wish you'd just told us instead of making it weird." Tasha chimed in before I could answer. "Yeah, we didn't mean any harm. It's just, some stories are better when streamlined." I set my fork down gently, folded my napkin. My heart didn't race. My voice didn't shake. "Let me be clear," I said, eyes steady on both of them. "I will no longer accept being reduced in this family. Erase me again, and the next silence won't be mine." The room froze. Cade blinked, unsure whether to speak. Tasha leaned back, a smirk tugging her lips. "You sound like you rehearsed that." Cade chuckled lightly, trying to melt the tension. "Let's not make this a whole thing, Mom. We're just trying to move forward." I looked at him, my boy who once couldn't sleep unless I hummed beside him. "Moving forward don't mean stepping over me." The air grew heavy, not loud, just full. Even the children sensed it. Forks paused mid-air. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between breaths. Tasha sipped her wine slowly, eyes fixed on me. Then she turned to Cade and said under her breath, "She's just mad she ain't the center no more." That did it. Not anger, just clarity. I stood, gathered my cobbler from the counter, and placed the lid on tight. "Seems like dinner's done," I said softly. No one stopped me. No one apologized. Cade's eyes darted away. Tasha's smirk stayed. I walked out steady. Didn't slam the door. Didn't look back. When I got home, the house was dark, quiet. I set the cobbler on the table and sat down with my old notebook. The one that's seen every season of my life. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "When they mock your calm, they ain't ready for your storm." I stared at the words, then reached for an envelope. Slipped in a photo, Cade at 10 years old, smiling at me like I was his whole world. Under it, I wrote on a small card, not for silence, for truth. I sealed it, tucked it into the drawer by my bed. Not to send yet, but ready. Before turning off the light, I stood at the window, looking out at the moonlit street. I whispered, "They were warned. This time, I ain't waiting for an apology to move." Some storms don't roar. They just arrive, prepared. I stepped into the gala dressed like I'd swallowed steel. The cream blazer, the navy skirt, pearls shining gently in the light. I kept my head high. My heart was steady. Around me, the reception hall glowed. Chandeliers, mirrors, framed photos lining the walls. Faces I once knew. Faces I once supported. As I walked, I paused at a large framed portrait. There were Cade, Tasha, grandchildren, happy, posed. But no image of me, no presence. A guest beside me whispered to another, "That woman must be staff." My throat tightened. When the mother becomes invisible, so do her images. I stepped on. I greeted people. I let my smile steady itself. Minutes later, the host called everyone's attention. Cade went up to the podium and pointed to a bronze plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "Thank you to our founding patrons." He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look who made this possible, Tasha Raynell." I clenched my hands beneath my dress. I recognized that donation number. And the part I funded, yet the credit went to Tasha alone. I raised my chin. The room erupted into applause. I said nothing. Inside, my resolve crystallized. Later, a man approached me with a glass in hand. "Could you get me some water, please?" he asked, addressing me like a server. My smile froze. I answered softly, "I'm actually a guest, not staff." He flushed. Cade looked away. That moment cut deeper than any insult before. I slipped away to the balcony. The night air hit me like clarity. I stared at city lights, structure, and motion. I opened my purse, took out the envelope marked "Perspective," and placed inside a cropped photo, me beside them once. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Remy, I need your help in retelling who built this legacy." I paused, watched my reflection in the glass, then whispered to the wind, "When they hide you, you become the clue they can't erase." I walked into the boardroom early, before most had arrived, carrying my binder like armor. The air felt thick with expectations. Portraits and plaques from the gala hung on the walls. Tasha front and center, the children, the board members. And there I was missing, invisible in every frame. That absence spoke loud. I spotted the bronze plaque again, installed already, bearing Tasha's name as the sole founding patron. I held my breath for a moment till Cade stood and nodded a stiff greeting. Board members avoided my gaze. Some whispered, "Can she even sit here?" I opened my binder and placed the perspective folder right in the center of the table. The room shivered a bit. I was here. Cade called the meeting to order. The agenda, mission statement updates, growth strategy. But I interrupted, voice steady. "Before we begin, I want to ask, why doesn't my name appear in those portraits on the wall?" Heads turned. Tasha answered smoothly, "We streamlined visuals. We wanted focus." I leaned forward. Focus should never come at the cost of erasure. A man across the table addressed me like a visitor. "Ma'am, you're here as a guest?" The word hung in the air. I responded evenly. "I raised the foundation you sit on." Silence followed. Some board members shifted in their chairs. Cade's face tightened. The meeting moved on, but the center of gravity changed. Midway through discussion, I slipped pages of receipts, transcripts, podcast quotes into the agenda folder. I passed them to the chair. When it was my turn, I laid out facts. The donation I made, documented. The photo credit erased. The narrative spun. Tasha tried to interrupt. I raised my hand. "Let me finish," I said. Then, "My donation was the seed. You watered it with my sweat." The room fell into that kind of quiet where everyone hears what they refuse to acknowledge. After the meeting, I retreated to my study. My heart thudded. I replayed my speech in whispered echoes. I paced, words turning over in my mind. Then I sat and began typing a letter to the local press, truth delivered, unfiltered. In my drawer, I placed copies of the board's financials, tagged for future release. I paused, finger hovering over send. I whispered in the dark. "They counted me out. Now they'll have to count us in." The battlefield may be silent, but tonight, I claimed my corner. That morning, the house was still, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breath. I sat at my desk, coffee cooling by my side, eyes fixed on the laptop screen. The email was ready, attachments in place, subject line bold, regarding the foundation's true origins. I didn't hesitate. I hit send. That whoosh, that little sound most folks ignore, echoed in my chest like a gavel. That was it. Years of silence broke in a click. I leaned back in my chair, eyes dry but burning. Now, I whispered. They got to face what they tried to bury. I refreshed my inbox once, twice, waiting. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. By the time noon rolled in, my name was on local radio. They read sections of the email on air. One of the morning hosts even said, "It's about time someone exposed what families really do behind the fancy photos." I didn't cry. I just nodded. That afternoon, I got calls, not from my children, but from church folks, neighbors, women I hadn't spoken to in years. "We always knew something wasn't right," they told me. "You stood tall, Miss Lucina." I thanked them, quietly. Then Cade texted me, "Stop playing these games. I'll ruin you." That man still didn't get it. I wasn't playing. I was reclaiming. Later that day, I sat across from Remy in his law office. He didn't talk much, just slid the papers across the table. "Your name is back where it always belonged," he said. I looked at the charter, the property deeds, the founding documents, my signature missing before, now restored. I held that folder like a second spine, not joy, not revenge, just recognition. He asked if I wanted to sue. I told him, "This ain't about the court, it's about clarity." And I meant it. That evening, there was a public event downtown. Cade had his usual suit on, charm dialed up to 10. He stood beside a velvet-covered podium and gave a long speech about legacy. Then he unveiled it, a restored family heirloom, a mantel clock my father passed down. He claimed Tasha had funded its repair, a gift from our generation to the next. I stepped forward, calm. "That clock was bought by me," I said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "I still have the deed. I restored it myself 5 years ago. Look close, you'll see the initials." I pointed to the brass plate underneath. LEM, Lucina Elaine Morrow. There it was, real and undeniable. The room shifted. Some folks looked confused. A few clapped softly. Most went quiet. Cade didn't speak. He didn't have to. That moment said everything. You can edit the captions, you can crop the pictures, but you can't erase the fingerprints off a clock passed through generations. After the event, I drove home slow. The streetlights flickered like soft reminders. Some truths don't scream, they stand. I poured myself a glass of water, opened my legacy envelope, and laid out every photo, every receipt, every page that told the story as it happened, not as they wished it had. Then I picked up my phone and sent Cade one last message. Truth doesn't need approval to exist. I closed my laptop, took a long breath. Not relief, not yet, but peace in knowing the truth had its day. Tonight, the truth stood firm. Tomorrow, I rise beyond the shadows they cast. Sunday morning came soft and slow. Fog hung low over the streets as I walked toward the community center, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts. My shoes clicked against the sidewalk in rhythm with my breath. It felt different now, lighter somehow, like my feet finally understood the ground they stood on. The air smelled of dew and memory. I thought of my late husband, his old sermons about grace and resilience. "Don't carry what don't belong to you," he used to say. I smiled under my breath. Maybe, after all these years, I was finally learning to set it down. When I reached the building, a few elders were setting up chairs. They nodded at me, not with pity, not with gossip, but respect. I nodded back. My presence there wasn't about money anymore. It meant something earned, something lived. Inside, the walls looked new. Not fresh paint, just renewed spirit. Photos of community founders lined one side. And right there, between two portraits I'd helped commission years ago, hung mine. Not large, not centered, just right, balanced. People began filling the seats, not for drama, not to whisper about my family, but to listen. When I stood to speak, the microphone squeaked a little. I didn't use notes. I spoke plain. "They took what they thought was mine," I said, "but they never took me." Some folks smiled, some cried quietly. I told them stories, how I used to stretch $1 till it sang, how I worked nights so Cade could dream big, how forgiveness isn't softness, It's strategy. I quoted Maya Angelou, words that had carried me through too many nights. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. The room stayed silent for a moment, the good kind of silence, where healing breathes. Then soft applause. It wasn't loud, it was honest. Kate and Tasha didn't show up. I knew they wouldn't. Funny thing is, I wasn't disappointed. Not anymore. I'd spent years waiting for their validation, when all I needed was my own peace. After the talk, May came up to me, old friend, still sharp-eyed. She took my hands and said, "You gave birth to a son, but you raised a legacy." I held her tight. For once, no words came. I realized I didn't need an apology to move on. Cade's journey was his own now, and mine didn't have to circle back for him to catch up. That evening, the house felt calm. I sat at my writing desk, same place I once wrote angry letters I never sent. This time, I wrote a letter to someone different, to the woman I used to be. "Dear me," I began, "you did good. You made it through storms meant to drown you. You kept your head when silence tried to break you. You chose dignity over destruction. You did it your way." I sealed it, slipped it into the family Bible, the same one that held my marriage vows and my mother's prayers. Then I just sat there listening. Outside, kids were laughing, chasing one another down the street, life moving forward like it always does. And I was part of it, not a relic, not a ghost, but present. Before bed, I went out to the yard. The soil was cool beneath my hands as I planted a rose bush near the porch. Not a fancy gesture, just a promise to keep growing. A little girl from down the block stopped by, her braids bouncing. "Miss Lucina," she asked, "is that your rose?" I smiled. "It's for all of us," I said. She grinned and ran off, leaving laughter in the air. I stood there a while, hands in dirt, heart at peace. For the first time in years, my house didn't feel haunted by what was gone. It felt alive with what remained. Some endings aren't quiet, they're just calm enough for you to finally hear your own voice again.